Okay, so it's World Poverty Eradication Day. The theme for this year is acting together to achieve social and environmental justice for all. And to help us understand how poverty can be eradicated by 2023, according to the Sustainable Development Goals, we have Collins Nwosu, who's a development consultant, joining us from our Abuja studio. And then we're also expecting Sulaiman Aribabu, who's the Executive Secretary of HEDA Resource Center, who joins us via Skype. Thank you for joining us. Okay, so let me start out with you, Collins. This matter of, again, in the last segment, and I'm sure you were listening in on that, we're talking about growing food, and I want to read that. It says, grow, nourish, sustain, together our actions are our future. Then we come to this one about eradicating poverty, and it says again, acting together to achieve social and environmental justice for all. Let's look at the two themes. One on poverty, one on food safety. How do they relate?
Okay, I think, Nyota, thanks.
Yes,
when we talk about poverty, it's important to look at the dynamics around poverty. We need to define what poverty is. We have energy poverty. We have skill sets poverty. We're poor in a lot of things. So let's bring it home to the Nigerian context and say, look, if we're talking about food security, then somebody has to think of how to deal with it. Then we need the government to provide the enabling environment for us to deal with it. So it's you can't do one without the other. You cannot talk about food alone without talking about shelter. You can't talk about shelter alone without talking about security. You can't talk about security without talking about the enabling environment for us to thrive. And that environment for us to thrive, if I go back to agriculture, is the basis for us to come out of poverty. So if you plant a seed, that seed needs the right environment to thrive. So I can say poverty can be looked at as SARS. Let's look at the SARG, not SARS now, SARG. So we have situational poverty. The A would be, you have generational poverty. We have absolute poverty. We have relational poverty. And you would agree with me that Nigeria, we've gone through all of these. Generational poverty, where for 2 decades you have people who are living under $361 in a year. That's less than 130K or thereabouts in a year. How do we change that? How do we move out of this paradigm into something new? It's where is the crux of the matter. So what we're seeing on the street is insecurity. That's ending one form of poverty. You can't do it alone. We have to do it together as a group. If Doc and the agric head from LCCI spoke intensely about agriculture. They spoke about that, and I think it's interesting because we have a lot of arable land. And the dynamics, again, we cannot do it alone. So I would say who will play what role? Who should play what role? And it comes full circle. So one, we know what kind of poverty we're dealing with. Next is that we know that it is not a one-sided thing. It's not about agriculture. It's not about technology. It's about the whole Nigerian person. What should a Nigerian look like? When you talk about a Nigerian who is not poor, that means it's a person that can afford to have a house, or somebody who has shelter, who can afford to buy clothing to cover themselves, can have a certain level of education. We need to define those things for ourselves. Because if we don't have a shared vision and a clear vision as to where we're going to, then we can talk about reducing or eradicating poverty and still be where we are. But I think that the conversation should be steered around defining it, having that shared vision around what a Nigerian's life should be like, who a Nigerian should be. And then we now start driving it on all fronts. So government should play their role. Those who've put in authority, who've given the responsibility of putting rules in place for us should play their role. We, again, should also play our role in holding them responsible. I think that is how we can tie this together, Nyota.
that position you put forward, Collins, about the, looking at who a Nigerian should be is one position that indeed the entire country needs to begin to look at, both the leadership and the led. But we've been joined by Sulaiman Arigbabu, who's the Executive Secretary of HEDA Resource Center. Mr. Arigbabu, before you came on, Collins Mosu was talking about looking at this poverty eradication holistically. He talked about types of poverty, situational poverty, generational poverty, and he went on and on. But one of the things he came down to in tying it up, he looked at the thinking of how a Nigerian should be. It's not just about what he has on his table or what he's wearing or where he lives. All of it put together kind of like makes up who the Nigerian should be. So when you think about eradicating poverty, it's about the being. Do you agree with him?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for having me, and good morning, viewers. Mr. Collins is actually right. We cannot look at poverty by just a narrow parameter. Poverty comes in various ways. And before you can say that somebody, when the president was talking about lifting people out of poverty, what we hope is that the president do understand that poverty, lifting people out of poverty do not just mean that they have access to food, which is very, very critical. But it also means that the quality of life of the person, um, issues as simple as access to safe water to drink, access to toilets, issues as simple as access to other social services, access to justice. These are the things that define whether a man feels helpless. Poverty is a feeling of helplessness. When a man is unable to address the issues around him, a man or a woman, any person, unable to address the issues around them when they are dependent on others or they don't even have anybody to depend on, then you can say that even if they eat good food, what is the point in having good food if when a police, for instance, arrests you, you are totally helpless to help yourself out? So poverty has to be looked at in an holistic way. When people don't have access to good health care, then their ability, when disease do come, their ability to help themselves out of that situation is also impaired, and that can then lead them into other forms of poverty. So you look at issues around energy poverty, healthcare poverty, lack of education itself. Is so when you have a country where we are reputed to have the highest number of out of school children, then you can see that Nigeria indeed will be classified as a poor country. So when people don't have access to those things that can empower them to by themselves define their narrative, improve their own quality of living, take care of situations that will arise. As human beings, situations will arise. The ability of people to be able to deal with these things is part of what you look at when you are talking about whether somebody is poor or not. Unfortunately, this is the reality for many Nigerians. And according to our own National Bureau of Statistics, over 83 million Nigerians. And I say over because even the NBS did say that their latest statistics do not include, for instance, Borno State for obvious reasons. And they say that over 83 million Nigerians live on less than 400 naira a day. Now, when we say 400 naira a day, we don't mean that they have less than 400 naira to buy food. It means that when you quantify all the expenditure around them, whether where they sleep, their ability to access basic drugs, their ability to access education, anything that they need money to use to provide for themselves, they have less than 400 naira to themselves. To just imagine somebody in Lagos. There are parts of Lagos that I can't get to and come back home with 400 naira. So we are saying that the measurement of NBS as per 83 million Nigerians is even far below the world standard of saying people are living under less than $2 a day. We are saying that people in Nigeria, by our current exchange rate, are living under less than $1 a day, over 83 million Nigerians. And when you look at all the things around them, you know that then when the president is talking about lifting 100 million people out of poverty, we need a national consensus to define what it is that we want to achieve. At which stage would we say we have been able to lift these people out of poverty? So we can see a lot of government effort, for instance, in the conditional cash transfer, um, in programs like the Empower. These are good initiatives that can help, but I hope that nobody is by such then saying that these people have been lifted out of poverty. There are things around them that need to be addressed that will determine whether they can then transit from poverty to some form of sustainable living or not. If those things are not addressed, then people will fall back into the poverty bracket, and that's where we need to pay attention.
Okay, okay, Collins. Now, when we keep, there's this thing I like to tell some of my colleagues. I say sometimes we use highfalutin words or terminology that the man who's selling or the woman who's frying her akara by the roadside or selling corn, which I like a great deal, roast corn, may not exactly understand when you say, "Madam, you're living below $1 a day." So let's bring it down to naira. $1 a day means they're living below 380 to 400 naira a day, and that's quite difficult. But this is also in a time when you have advanced development and technology everywhere. I mean, sophisticated phones, you can do things from any part of the world. Today, literally, you can do anything anywhere. Even with a pen, you can do a lot of things. But then you still find people who are living below 400 naira a day. How difficult would that be? Or what's the quickest way to get these people out of that kind of position?
Nyanta, it's called an all hands on deck approach. We need to orient and reorient ourselves. Okay, fine. So you've defined who a Nigerian should be, what a Nigerian should be like. You need to have shelter, this kind of shelter. You need to have running water. This, you need to have access to this. Okay, so if we define that, and you come down to saying, let's deal with poverty, as coming from your question, I'll tell you that what we think of is important. We need to, it's not just the police that needs reorientation. As a nation, we need to be reoriented. These two gentlemen who started Paystack have gotten someone to look and see the value they are creating and bought over their company for $200 million. Let's just say they bought it for several billions of naira. Why did that happen? How did that happen? What made it possible? These gentlemen saw an opportunity and they opened their minds to the possibility of what they could do and what could be done. And in the challenges that we have as a nation in the payment systems, they decided to solve it. So one is that we must begin to see our problems as the road to our solution and our getting out of poverty. That's one. Secondly, we also need to begin to think of possibilities in a different way. I'll put it this way. We have received aid and grants for years and for decades. Where has that led us to? It has led us to believe that if I don't get help from somebody outside of Nigeria, then I cannot do much. And that is not true. Because what has gone out of Nigeria in terms of raw materials, in terms of human resources, is much more than what we're earning. I'll put it this way. I come to that lady who is selling corn or that man who is selling corn and tell you, oh, this your corn is not worth much. Let me help you. And then I take the corn from them raw without them roasting it. I go back, I roast some. I turn some into powder for them to make pap or whatever and bring it back to them and sell it to them. And say, I took your corn, I helped you, I gave you 10 naira. But now I have converted that corn to roasted corn, to pap. I've done several things with it and brought to feed for their chickens and now started selling it to them. Who is the poor person? The person who had corn was not poor because they had corn. They were poor because they didn't know what to do with it. And that's where orientation comes in. So when I say all hands
Collins,
on deck, that means at school level, at family level, local government level, national orientation agency, we need to begin to tell ourselves, this is what is possible. This is
okay,
what you can
Collins,
do with what you have,
Collins,
and
can
we
we
move from
just
there, Nyota.
we would come back to this point of the reorientation, what we can do and what we should be doing, where the man that has a corn understands that he can do a lot more, or even at that, where his neighbor who's seeing him with the corn can also think about, I can roast it for him, and both of us can share the profit after the roasting. But we'll look at that when we come back from this break. Thank you for staying with us. Collins Nwosu, we're talking about the need for reorientation. Our system is so used to me, myself, and I, or soulpreneurship. So it's just about me, what I have, and what I can do with it, and what I can achieve with it. But how about we begin to look at networks, connections, instead of selling my corn to you, who takes it away to turn to pap, to roast, and to turn to animal feed. I connect with this other person who can help me roast. I know there's a chain. We create a chain around us. At the end of the day, all of us are benefiting. Is that the way we should be thinking?
It's important we think that way, Nyota. I will borrow from what's happening right now. The End SARS movement is beyond end police brutality. It's actually a deep outcry for correction and for connection, for recognition. To say that, look, you, the police officer, we are together in this. We're in this country together. So if you're not being treated right, you're not treating me right. And that's the impact we're seeing. So I cannot operate in isolation. You, who is meant to be providing policies for us, and you who is supposed to be dealing with us from providing the enabling environment, so to speak, you need to recognize that if you provide it, then I will be more productive. If I'm more productive, you have more taxes to do the things that need to be done. We will not be complaining about a lot of things. So that synergy is important. That networking is important. I can't do it alone. So still talking about the corn, it was interesting that after we spoke about corn, the interswitch example was still about corn. And they talked about the payment solution. So if I have produced what I'm producing, how would somebody pay for it? How would somebody see it? Then what would be the law or the legislation that says this is how I can maybe export it and get the support that I require in order to push it out there. We've heard other guests on the show talk about food standards, phytosanitary standards and all of that. Nyota, we have to look at it as in a holistic manner, from government to local government, from public sector to private sector. So it's no longer talking about one thing. It's talking about the human being. I need a house. So if I'm living in a house and there's a farm in my backyard, I produce whatever I'm producing. There's a processing center in my estate. I take everything to the processing center and they process it. That's energy. But then there's the road to carry it out. And there's the petrol to fuel the car. So then there's the security to protect us, to make sure that these things don't go bad. And then there's internet or wireless connections for me to be able to call the people that are going to buy from me. And then the world can see what we're selling. So networks are important. We cannot deal with this without networks. Networks and networking are key. And as I said, a holistic approach. So we must start breaking down the silos. Already in the world, there's what's called servitization and servicification. Those two things mean that the barrier or the lines between industries are being broken. So somebody is producing a photocopier, for instance, and bringing the photocopier to you and saying, the number of copies you make is what I will charge you on. So the person is no longer providing a product or a service. Somebody is saying, I am farming, but I'm a transport company, but I will move all your farm produce for you. Pay me when you sell. There's a synergy that is being created, and that's what we need to expand upon. So these opportunities have to be dealt with. These opportunities have to be leveraged upon. And I said that the opportunities come from the problems we have. The problems we have are actually where the opportunity lies. So when we see them, we start dealing with them. Housing, deal with it. Agriculture, deal with it. Storage, deal with it. Wastage, deal with it. Security, deal with it. And it's not in isolation. It goes back to defining, look, Nigerian, this is what you should be. This is what you should look like. And in trying to achieve what I would refer to as the Nigerian dream, the Nigerian of today, the Nigerian of tomorrow, then we would begin to address all of the matters that need to be addressed, and we would find advancement. I'm not saying it's an overnight solution, but it is where we must begin to move.
Okay.
So yes, there's
Mr.
the ACME scheme that the government is running. It's beautiful. And there are other schemes, but until we look at them in the light of the whole, Nyota, we would be operating in silos and it will not work. It can't work.
Mr. Agbabu, apparently the NSAS movement is actually creeping into every other facet of our life. Collins has managed to squeeze it into the Poverty Eradication Day commemoration today. Do you think it's also part of what is needed to be done to end poverty in this country?
Thank you. If you look at the theme for this year's World Poverty Eradication Day, it's talking about dealing with social and environmental injustice. And when we're talking about what kind of the types of poverty, one of the things we did mention is generational poverty, where young people feel left out, where access to opportunities is constrained for them because they are young people. You want to get a job and you require experience. To get experience, you need to get a job. So you see a catch-22 situation. People expect you to have 5 years experience and you should not be above age 23 to get a job when the schools are closed for most of the time. So that's why we say that when you want to look at the situation around people, it has to be holistic, so that you can deal with all of those various issues that hinder them. That makes it almost impossible for them to even harvest and harness the opportunities around them. So what we are seeing on the streets of Nigeria today is because we have not given our young people sufficient share in the wealth of this country. We have not given them enough reason to feel that, okay, they are part of what is happening in this country. So what you see on the streets is an expression of frustration. And it therefore means that if we are going to be lifting people out of poverty, we should not look at it as we are creating these programs we are creating are good. I repeat, conditional cash transfer, the End Power Program, we know that these are just sub-gaps. We need to find solutions to the things that really hinder people from being able to help themselves out of poverty. Conflict is a major problem in most parts of this country. There are parts of the country where farmers can no longer go to their farms for fear of being kidnapped or for fear of banditry or insurgency in some part of the country. So if you don't deal with this, no amount of intervention you make in putting money in the hands of people will take them out of poverty. The real sustainable way out of poverty is that people are able to deal with their issues. Access to justice, access to social amenities like healthcare. Education is important. So what colleagues were talking about earlier about the person who has crumbs but does not know that, okay, I can have this much value. So when we say education, first we are referring to educating our children, educating our young ones. But we are not going to leave out those who are above the primary education age or the secondary age, even people who are already elderly, but who are still active in production. We need to give them education that helps them to transit from their current state, which might not be desirable, to where they possibly could be. So I'm making information available to them, making knowledge about what they are doing and how they can do it better available to them on a large scale. It's not just 1 or 2 programs here. So this is where we need, for instance, our local government to become active again. We need our state government to take much more responsibility. And we need the federal government to support this with appropriate policy and funding as the case may be. So when we deal with poverty at this level, then we can then set targets and say, oh, in the next 50 years, Nigeria would have dealt with poverty to all 20 years or 30 years. all of these goals that we set become meaningless if we are just thinking of, okay, government is going to spend about 2 trillion to put money in the hands. These are part of it, but they cannot take people out of poverty unless you solve the issues around them, unless you take care of those things that push them back into poverty, unless you make young people see opportunity, give them room for expression. The HENSAS movement, the HENSAS campaign is all about this. There are not much opportunities, and when people create opportunities for themselves, there is a stigmatization, and there are some people in arms who can come and brutalize them and label them wrongfully. We know that indeed there are bad heads in the society, whether in the police or among our young people, but you cannot do a generalization. So, for instance, the Nigerian police is feeling it now. Everybody is against the police, whereas it's not all of the police that have been bad, and it's not everything that even SARS has done for us that is bad. But the fact that we feel so much, the ones that they did wrongfully, this is why. So the same way they generalize youth when they go after them for dressing in a certain way or for having some measure of comfort. So, to deal with poverty in a country like Nigeria, it has to be holistic. And another important part of it which Nigeria needs to deal with is the environmental and social injustices. The biggest driver of poverty in Nigeria is inequality. Actually, across the world, the Oxfam report on poverty keeps insisting that 1% of the world population has more money than 6.9 billion people. And that is a problem for the world to deal with. When you step it down to a country like Nigeria, every day we
Oh, well, we hope to get Mr. Babu back. That conversation he was headed, it's quite interesting about the statistics and what we need. Okay, he's back. Go ahead, Mr. Babu.
Yeah, sorry, there was a call coming in. So what I was
Okay.
trying to say is that in a country like Nigeria, you have new people coming into millions that is not hinged on production, whereas people who are toiling every day are being pushed further into poverty. So there is inequality. There is gender inequality. Women have much less access to even government programs.
Oh, boy. Okay.
Issues that Nigeria as a country need to deal with. When we deal with inequality, we'll be able to ensure that we take that we would achieve. Sorry about that. There's a call trying to come in. We'll take many more people out of poverty with deliberate action than what we are doing piecemeal. So, and this is a place where government needs to pay attention to. Government needs to deal with insecurity. It's a
Okay.
major problem for our farmers. Government needs to deal with the
Mr.
issue
Babu,
of climate change.
and in as much as
Yes,
we're really enjoying this conversation, but we understand that we're out of time and we have to end this segment at this point. I want to thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today. Interesting conversation, and we will definitely come back to this in the subsequent programs. But Collins Moso, Development Consultant, and Sulaiman Aribabu, Executive Secretary, Heather Resource Center. Thank you, gentlemen, for sharing your thoughts with us today. So as we'll be back for the home stretch in a moment, don't go away.